My uncle stood in front of the family, grinning as if he'd won some great victory. But the truth? He had just stolen $55 million that didn't belong to him. The chandelier light glared against the glass of his champagne, the sound of his laughter slicing through the tense silence. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, and my cousin sat frozen, powerless. He thought we were all broken, that no one had the strength or the proof to fight back. He didn't know that I, Isabella Cross, had been watching him for years, and I had already prepared the blade that would cut him down. My name is Isabella Cross, and until recently, I was just the quiet niece in a family that worshipped money more than blood. We owned one of the largest logistics companies in the Midwest, built brick by my grandfather after he came home from the war with nothing but 2 hands and a dream. By the time I was born, it had grown into an empire worth over $200 million. But behind the polished boardrooms and smiling family portraits, there was rot. My uncle, Richard, the eldest son, always believed the company was his by destiny, not by merit. While my father handled operations and worked 18-hour days, Richard played golf with politicians, hosted extravagant parties, and whispered into shareholders' ears. When my grandfather died, the balance shifted. My father trusted loyalty. Richard trusted greed. And in a single meeting with contracts none of us had seen before, he orchestrated the sale of a massive portion of our holdings, stealing $55 million into his own offshore accounts. I remember the night my father collapsed at the kitchen table, head in his hands, unable to breathe. My mother kept asking, "How could your own brother do this?" But I knew. Richard had always underestimated me, the invisible niece. What he didn't know was that I worked in cybersecurity for a government contractor, and I had access to tools that could expose every wire transfer, every forged signature, every hidden shell company he thought would protect him. He thought the family was too weak to fight back, but I was done being invisible. I still remember being 12 years old, sitting in the corner of the boardroom when my grandfather introduced me to the directors. He had rested a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder and said, "This one's sharper than all of you put together. Watch her." The men laughed politely. Richard didn't. His smile froze, just a little too tight. That was the first time I saw it, his fear that someone else, even a girl, might be a threat. As the years passed, I learned to read him. Whenever I walked into a room, his eyes would flicker with irritation, as if I were a stain he couldn't scrub away. At family dinners, he'd ask loaded questions. "Isabella, when are you going to find a real job, or will you just keep playing with computers like some hacker in a basement?" My cousins laughed, my aunts smiled uncomfortably, and I sat there, silently, building firewalls and cracking encryption at 15, while he thought I was just wasting time online. But the moment that truly burned itself into me came the night of my grandfather's funeral. After the guests left, I found Richard in the study, glass of scotch in hand, rifling through old files. He didn't notice me until I spoke. "Shouldn't those papers stay with the estate lawyer?" He turned, smirk curling. "Sweetheart, the world doesn't wait for lawyers. It rewards men who take what they deserve." That sentence stayed with me for years. Later, when the board announced Richard had sold off assets behind closed doors, I recognized his fingerprints all over it. Fake invoices, falsified contracts, manipulated emails. It was the same arrogance he'd shown in that study. He believed rules were cages for fools, and he was destined to be free. What he didn't realize was that the same arrogance made him sloppy, and sloppy men always leave trails. Trails I was very good at following. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about watching my father's life's work stolen in day bright. It was about my mother pawning jewelry to keep our home, while Richard's wife flaunted new diamonds at charity galas. Every humiliation added another layer of steel inside me. By the time I was 25, I had no illusions left. Family ties meant nothing when tied to men like him, and I promised myself, one day, Richard would choke on the very empire he thought he had stolen. By the time Richard finalized the sale of the company for $55 million, I was no longer just the silent girl in the corner. I had a degree in cybersecurity, 3 years of experience consulting for financial institutions, and a mind sharpened by betrayal. But Richard didn't care. To him, I was still the child. I learned about the sale not from him, but from a journalist friend who forwarded me the press release. Richard's face was splashed across the page, all smiles, shaking hands with the buyers. The headline screamed about his brilliance, his vision. No mention of the decades of sweat from my father, no nod to my grandfather's trust in the family legacy. I wanted to scream. Instead, I dug. For weeks, I barely slept. Coffee cups piled up on my desk as I trawled through encrypted emails, proxy accounts, and hidden servers. Richard thought he was untouchable, burying money in offshore accounts, laundering payments through shell corporations. But he underestimated me. The first crack appeared when I intercepted an email chain between him and a broker in Singapore. He was bragging about moving funds into a clean account under his wife's name. Arrogant, predictable, sloppy. Meanwhile, he paraded himself at every gala, every magazine cover, every business talk show. The genius who closed the $55 million deal, they called him. And every time I saw his smug face, my resolve hardened. But the real breaking point came at my mother's birthday. She had aged 20 years in the span of 2, her hands trembling as she blew out the candles on a cake I'd bought with my consulting salary. Richard showed up late, drunk, tossing an envelope of money on the table. For the bills, since your little computer girl can't keep you in the lifestyle Dad promised. That was it. I excused myself, went upstairs, and locked the door. On my laptop, I pulled up the digital dossier I'd been compiling for months. Spreadsheets of stolen funds, screenshots of offshore transfers, voice clips of Richard laughing about burying the law in paperwork. I realized then I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was building a weapon. But weapons are useless unless timed perfectly. So I waited. When rumors started circling that Richard was negotiating another deal, this time a risky partnership with an international shipping conglomerate, I knew it was my moment. If he fell then, he would fall hard. And I would be the one pulling the trigger. Richard thought he had the world in his palm. The newspapers hailed him as a visionary. Investors lined up at his door, and whispers about an $80 million shipping deal put him at the center of every cocktail conversation in Manhattan. But while he was toasting champagne with bankers, I was preparing his execution. Months of sleepless nights, encrypted digging, and careful patience had led to this. A digital arsenal capable of reducing his empire to dust. Offshore accounts, shell companies, secret bribes to politicians, even falsified safety reports from the factories. Every shred of it neatly cataloged in a folder I named simply Crossfire. The opportunity arrived at a charity gala in the downtown financial district. Richard was the keynote speaker, basking in the glow of photographers' flashbulbs, boasting about innovation and family values. His voice dripped with hypocrisy. My mother sat at the back of the room, quiet, her eyes distant. She no longer recognized the company she had helped build alongside my father and grandfather. When Richard declared into the microphone, "This new shipping partnership will cement our legacy for generations," I knew it was time. I rose from my table, laptop in hand, and walked toward the AV booth. The technician barely glanced at me. I'd arranged my access days before with a forged clearance badge. One click, and the projector screen behind Richard flickered. Instead of his company's logo, the room lit up with rows of numbers. Bank transfers, emails, and incriminating photos filled the giant screen. The crowd gasped. Richard froze mid-sentence. His confident smile collapsed as the words "illicit wire transfer Cayman Islands" appeared in bold letters behind him. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into shouts. Journalists scrambled for their phones, investors demanded answers, and my mother's face slowly transformed from shock into something like hope. I took the microphone. My voice was calm, steady, every syllable razor sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, for months, Richard Cross has funneled millions out of the family company into his own pockets. He sold what was not his to sell. He stole from his own blood. And tonight, I'm here to show you proof. The slideshow rolled on. Emails of bribes, falsified signatures, proof of insider trading. Every slide was another nail in Richard's coffin. He shouted over me, desperate. Lies! Fabrications! She's jealous. She's bitter. Don't listen to her. But it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. Security moved toward him as I finished. My father built this company with honesty. My grandfather gave his life for its foundation. Richard thought he could sell it for $55 million and bury us with it. But tonight, the truth belongs to all of you. The room erupted. Flashbulbs blinded Richard as reporters swarmed. Investors stormed out, shouting about lawsuits. Police, who I had tipped off hours earlier, entered the hall just as Richard tried to bolt for the exit. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. For the first time in years, I breathed. My mother wept silently at her table, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was relief. And as Richard was dragged out, his face pale and broken, I finally understood. I hadn't just exposed him. I had taken back what was stolen from us. But the story wasn't over yet. The trial was coming, and with it, the world would learn just how deep Richard's corruption ran. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and cold justice. For weeks, the world had followed every headline. Cross Empire scandal. Richard Cross faces federal charges. $55 million fraud exposed by family insider. That insider was me. I sat at the front row beside my mother, hands clasped, heart steady. Across the aisle, Richard looked nothing like the man who once strutted through boardrooms with arrogance dripping from every pore. His tailored suits had been replaced by a plain gray uniform, his wrists heavy with steel cuffs. His once perfect hair hung limp, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. The prosecutor laid it all out. Money laundering, securities fraud, insider trading, embezzlement. Every charge backed by the evidence I had unveiled. Emails, recordings, bank transfers. It was airtight. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked with deliberate calm. The courtroom hushed. I could feel Richard's eyes burning into me, but I didn't look his way. "My name is Isabella Cross," I began. "My father and grandfather built Cross Global to support workers, families, and a legacy of honesty. Richard sold it off for $55 million, betraying every principle it stood for. He didn't just steal money, he stole trust. He stole security from thousands of employees who depended on this company. And he tried to steal our family's future. But I couldn't let him." My words were clear, not trembling, not angry, just final. Richard's lawyer tried to spin it, claimed I fabricated evidence, that I was motivated by revenge. But the jury saw through it. His desperation oozed with every objection, every sputtering question. Finally, Richard himself was called to testify. He sneered at me across the room. "You always wanted to destroy me, Isabella. You were too weak to run the company, so you chose the coward's way, ruin me in public." I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the silence. "No, Richard, I didn't ruin you. You did that all by yourself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the judge's gavel struck twice to restore order. When the jury returned, their verdict was swift: guilty on all counts. The judge's words echoed like thunder. "Richard Cross, for your crimes of fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Richard's face collapsed. For the first time, the mask was gone. He looked small, powerless, finished. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me, microphones thrust forward. "Isabella, do you feel vindicated? What's next for Cross Global?" I smiled faintly, shaking my head. This was never about money. This was about truth, about family. The company will be rebuilt, not for greed, but for the people who believed in it. Beside me, my mother took my hand. Her eyes shimmered with pride. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. For the first time in years, I believed it. Weeks later, I stood in my father's old office. The walls were stripped bare, waiting for a new beginning. Outside the window, the city glowed with possibility. I whispered to myself, like a vow, they tried to steal $55 million, but what they really stole was something far greater. Tonight, I take it all back. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the memory of the men who built everything, I knew I wasn't just a survivor. I was the heir, the guardian. The Cross name was mine again.